of 140 million poor and low-income people become organized to take action together, they may very well be the key to advancing an agenda that ensures the health and well-being of us all, and that can revive the heart and soul of this democracy. Thank you again.
Just before we go to Penda Hare, this is Dr. Barber, because I'm in Memphis and I have to get on a plane, let me thank Attorney Economist Sally Gupta Barnes and say to the media, lastly, this is why we say dealing with the issue of poverty and low wealth and our political elected officials are politically incompetent. It's not only morally indefensible and constitutionally inconsistent and economically insane, but politically incompetent not to build an agenda that speaks to the needs of over a third of the electorate. It is politically incompetent if politicians do not talk to, do not meet with poor and low wealth people, if they do not put a face on the things they are pushing and show the face, as we've been saying to the handlers of the president, the White House, and others, even now in this Build Back Better plan and with voting rights suppression, there should be gatherings with poor and low wealth voters, low income voters, and let them speak, let them talk, let them be seen. Because when we talk about poverty, we say to the media, please don't make the mistake sometimes when you say poverty, it automatically talks about black and about brown. We know that 60.9% of black people are poor and no wealth, and over 30% of white people are poor and no wealth. But in raw numbers, that's 66 million white people and 26 million black people, and 68% of Latinos and 68% of natives. This 140 million poor and low wealth people, low income people, represent every demographic in this country. And the voter suppression laws that we see now are not just about black people, not just about Jim Crow. It literally is about trying to suppress the vote of people, even on an economic basis, because as our report shows that when poor and low wealth people are talked to and organized and spoken to, they tend to vote. And when they tend to vote, they tend to vote in progressive ways. And so it is politically incompetent if you are serious about this democracy and its furtherance, not to have an agenda that talks about living wages and health care and housing and education and speaks directly to how these policies will lift the lives and transform the lives of the community of poor and low income voters. So thank you so much, Attorney Sally Gupta Barnes, and thank you to the other speakers that are going to give further validation to this groundbreaking report. It is a groundbreaking report and something that everybody in this country ought to pay attention to, because poor and low income voters have the power. They are the sleeping giant that could fundamentally shift the kind of politics and the outcome of politics in this country. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Reverend Barber. Now we're going to hear from counterpart Liz Theo-Harris. She's National Co-Chair for the Poor People's Campaign and Director of the Cairo Center. Reverend Liz?
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be with everybody today. As we've already heard, although 140 million people who are poor and low income make up 40% of the entire US population and 1/3 of the electorate, their needs and their concerns have been noticeably absent from national political discourse. But rather than addressing the scandal of poverty, the narrative that poor and low income people are apathetic about politics and don't care enough to vote, one of the many tired myths that blame the poor for our poverty, gets more attention than the injustice of poverty itself or the abdication of our elected leaders to address it. So this report is so groundbreaking because it shows, contrary to popular belief, that the biggest opportunity to build support for a moral agenda that lifts from the bottom is among poor and low-income voters, and that such voter engagement must be across geography and race, including Black, Hispanic, Asian, Native, and white voters. As was mentioned earlier, in the lead up to the 2020 elections, the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, organized a national, nonpartisan voter outreach and engagement drive. We mobilized our considerable infrastructure into an expansive voter registration and protection campaign, calling and texting over 2.3 million low propensity, poor and low income voters, mostly in the South and in battleground states. We did this outreach bilingually and in American Sign Language, which to date, very few other entities and organizations have done. We developed a poll monitoring and a legal defense strategy in 10 states alongside of leading civil rights groups, including the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and Forward Justice. And in our work, we reached millions upon millions with public voter trainings and educational programming. Of the people that we contacted, as we talk about in this report, more than 400,000, or about 20%, voted early. And on election day, large numbers of more of the people we contacted turned out. As this report shows, this election work had a statistically significant impact on voter turnout and suggests how much untapped power resides in poor and low-income communities. We have a central part of the work of the Poor People's Campaign where we say that we are registering people for a movement that votes. Indeed, the votes of poor and low-income Americans can make a difference in elections, and when organized into a broad and deep movement, we're able to have people take action together. We know that this can't be a piecemeal approach. It needs to be a comprehensive policy and political response. I want to mention that we're releasing this report the morning after the Poor People's Campaign just received the Freedom Award from the National Civil Rights Museum, an award that Mrs. Rosa Parks and Reverend Jesse Jackson and Joe Biden and other prominent human rights and civil rights leaders have won. We're releasing this report on the first day of our Poor People's Moral Action Congress, where nearly 1,000 grassroots leaders with the Poor People's Campaign will gather online, focused on building power, organizing from the bottom up, as we roll out a comprehensive mobilizing, organizing, registering, educating, and engaging drive towards the mass Poor People's and Low-Wage Workers Assembly and Moral March on Washington on June 18th, 2022. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. I want to end with a quote. Since I'm zooming in from Memphis, just blocks away from where Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was shot down as he was waging a Poor People's Campaign, I have some words from him from the conclusion to the Selma to Montgomery March on my mind. He said, "The threat of the free exercise of the ballot by the Negro and white masses alike resulted in the establishment of a segregated society. That's what happened when the Negro and white masses of the South threatened to unite and build a great society, a society of justice where none would prey upon the weakness of other, a society of plenty where greed and poverty would be done away." In this report, we are showing how it is possible to indeed build a society of plenty where everyone has a right to live. The sleeping giant of poor and low-income voters of all races and places is where such a society needs to begin. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Reverend Theo Harris. We will now hear from voting rights attorney Penda Hare.
Good morning, and I am so pleased today to speak about this important report. As indicated, I am a voting rights attorney. I work with Forward Justice, a nonpartisan law, policy, and strategy center dedicated to advancing racial, social, and economic justice in the U.S. South. And in our civil rights and voting rights work, we believe that the lawyers are not the leaders. The lawyers are the facilitators of the voices of those who are impacted by unjust and immoral laws and policies. And a majority of the people in this country are moral people who favor a moral policy agenda, policies that lift from the bottom. And this report shows what Dr. King said in that beautiful quote that Reverend Dr. Theo Harris just read, that if poor people and people of color were able to vote at the same rate as others, and if districts were fair, we would see a vast shift in who gets elected, in the policy agenda of elected officials, and the policy decisions that are made at the federal, state, and local levels. We would see a moral revolution of values in the policy arena. And this report is important, not just as a study of one election cycle, but as a roadmap for future strategies. The report, once and for all, puts a knife in tired claims of apathy, a fig leaf often advanced to cover up the real reason that poor people vote less than others. And I've been hearing that word apathy from defendants in voting rights cases for the entire 40 years that I've been doing this work. And I just want to stress, it is not apathy. This report shows it is systemic factors. These factors exposed in this report that explain lower voting rates. And as this report documents, those factors include a lack of discussion of issues of interest to poor people in political dialogue, a lack of candidates who run on a moral agenda, and at least as importantly, a lack of candidates who stick to that moral agenda once they get elected and fight for it with all the strength that they have. And also, there has been a lack of funding and support for organizing poor people and organizing poor people not just to vote, but to be involved year in, year out, day in, year out in holding elected officials accountable for the agenda that they are called on to not just to run in campaigns on, but to uphold once they get in office. And finally, another factor that explains lower voting rates and the potential to overcome those lower voting rates is the one I'm most familiar with, which is a voting system that suppresses and puts obstacles in the way of voters, as opposed to welcoming, supporting, and facilitating voting and electoral participation by low-income people and people of color. And we are now faced with an onslaught of repressive bills to make it more difficult and impossible for the Moral Fusion Coalition that is described in this report to vote at the highest levels. State after state, from Georgia, Texas, North Carolina, and many others have enacted or are in the process of enacting additional barriers to voting on top of a system that is already stacked against voters. And voter suppression aimed at people of color, but impacting more broadly, undermines the multiracial voting coalition that this report shows is possible. We need automatic registration, same-day registration, early voting, more and more conveniently located polling places, shorter voting lines, and other improvements instead of voter suppression. We need a voting paradigm that facilitates the broadest participation, and we need fair districts. And this is an uphill battle, but I know the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, is up to the task. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Hare. Now we will shift to hearing from the impacted voters who made a difference in this election and will be the force that shifts the 2022 midterm elections. First, we have Nicole Hill, former tri-chair of the Michigan Poor People's Campaign. Nicole is not only a registered voter, but an impacted resident of Detroit, a survivor of Katrina, and a water and social justice advocate and outreach organizer with the Michigan Welfare Rights Organization and People's Water Board Coalition. She is a mother of 9 and has worked tirelessly since 2013 around issues pertaining to poverty, water, and justice for all. Nicole?
Hi, everyone. How are you today? My name is Nicole Hill. Okay. My video's not started. I'm sorry, I have some technical difficulties. I do apologize. Okay, here we go. Can everyone see me now?
Yes, great.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole Hill, and I'm currently residing in Detroit, Michigan. And as was said, I am a former tri-chair for the Michigan Poor People's Campaign. I came to Detroit in 2005 as I was displaced by Hurricane Katrina. And since living here, I've been struggling just to meet my basic needs for myself and my family. We've had our water shut off before and face poverty every day. Along with daily issues I see in my community, like people losing their homes to foreclosure and the gentrification of our communities, the destruction of our education systems, which helps to usher our children through the school to prison pipeline. And being able to vote in all of the elections that I've voted in has allowed me to have a voice. It was vital for me and my family and my community. For once, I was hearing that my health care mattered, that I deserved a decent job and income. And I vote because I'm tired of others, telling us what we need and not letting us have a voice or a seat at the table, making decisions for myself and my community. And poor and vulnerable people must have concerns like this heard. These are the needs of the people. And there are so many of us in Michigan and in Louisiana, where I'm from, and across this country. My parents and my grandparents fought very hard for the right to vote and to have the right to exercise that right, and my issues to be counted and represented. We are not the cause of poverty, but a byproduct of poverty. Poverty is a decision that others made for us, and our votes can change that. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. We will now hear from Julio Acosta from the Texas Poor People's Campaign. Julio was born in Mexico in 1985. His dad is from El Salvador and his mom is from Mexico. They moved to Dallas, Texas when he was 2 years old. Since 2015, he has worked with the intersection of faith, justice, and electoral politics. He has been an advocate, activist, community organizer, and now system changer. He specializes in coalition building and getting out the vote efforts. Julio?
Hello to all from Dallas. Many friends and colleagues have been doing the best we can in Texas to stop the horrible attacks that are coming from here. Know that the harm from some elected officials does not represent the will of the majority of the state. As was mentioned, I was born in Mexico, and my family moved here to Texas when I was 2 years old in search of a better life. Growing up here, I saw firsthand how hard it was for people like me and so many others, including people who were born here and raised here, to live a good life. My family and I were able to benefit from citizenship through the legalization bill in 1986. I encourage everyone to vote and get out the vote because we need elected officials at every level to champion the needs of all of we the people, not just the voters. That is the promise of this country and of democracy. I vote because I firmly believe that a better world is not only possible, but necessary. Power is the ability to produce change. If we are not able to change something, we have no power over it. Our society will be better when all of us are given the opportunity to not just survive, but thrive. I call on all elected officials and candidates to not only listen to our needs, but be champions for our issues, like as we've mentioned, COVID relief, housing, healthcare, environment, education, and everything that affects our lives. When people are directly affected by issues and you are championing real solution to these issues, you will get the support that you need. From July 28 to the 31st of this year, the Texas Poor People's Campaign, along with partner organizations, brought together thousands of people from across the state to march and rally for our right to vote and other very important issues. As a person of faith, I believe that we are called to show love. I agree with the following words from Dr. Cornel West. Justice is what love looks like in public. Voting is part of seeking real justice for all of us. Some elections have been won or lost with just a few votes. Some even won by just one vote. There is so much power in our vote. Use it. Su voto es su poder. Úselo. Thank you.
Thank you, Julio. Next, we will have Jordan Scott from the Florida Poor People's Campaign. Jordan grew up in Tallahassee, Florida, and after spending some time outside of Florida, he moved back to Tallahassee and committed to fighting alongside working people of Florida for positive change in the state. He has worked jobs in warehousing, childcare, and education at all levels. He currently works as a graduate assistant at Florida State University and is a union member through the AFL-CIO. Jordan?
Yes, hi. My name is Jordan Scott, and I'm a graduate worker at Florida State University in Tallahassee, Florida. The wealthy and powerful have a few things. They have money, resources, and corruption. They think they run the country. Just one problem. We have hundreds of millions of people. Nothing runs through the government without going through us. I'm a diabetic. At my current job as a graduate assistant, we face high deductibles, high premiums, and occasionally uncovered care. I spend about 9 to 10% of my $22,000 salary on medical bills. I have spent time without health insurance. At points when I was younger, I would ration test strips. When I ran out, I devised a method to control my blood sugars without testing them. This isn't safe. In other instances, I haven't been able to afford my insulin. I've been fortunate enough to know other diabetics who would give me insulin. Let me tell you, it isn't easy to ask for insulin, and on the other end, it isn't easy to give insulin. People have died because of the medical struggles that I have had, and I'm fortunate that I survived. Even if you don't die, other issues can arise. I developed diabetic gastroparesis, a disease that makes it painful to eat. People got to work, sometimes for low wages and a lot of hours. In the warehouse industry, I made a nice wage, between $12.50 and $14.75 an hour. That's nice, except that I was working 70 to 80 hours a week. Lots of people do this, especially people with families, and let me tell you, that takes a toll on your health. And at what cost? That it means that parents aren't spending much time with their kids. For me, it meant my health declined rapidly. I've also worked in the childcare industry. Childcare doesn't pay well, close to the minimum wage. Working with kids of any age isn't easy, yet we are expected to have endless patience with children in the day and return home to worry about our rent payment and all of our other bills that can't be met. Get real. In Florida, people voted overwhelmingly for a $15 minimum wage, showing us that there is a desire to combat poverty and reform our economic and political system. We're in this fight together, and we are in it for the long haul. All that in mind, I have a few requests for those running for office in 2022. We need a single-payer healthcare system that takes the fate of our healthcare out of the hands of employers. We need pro-union laws that inhibit employers' ability to bust union election campaigns. We need laws that restrict so-called right to work and strike prohibition laws. We need federal minimum wage of at least $15 an hour. And what we're doing now isn't working, except for the wealthy people it benefits. Let's get real and let's be real honest. So I understand the cynicism, thinking that we can't change anything. However, if we aren't in this together, there is no chance for survival for us and our posterity. So vote, organize, join a community organization and or the Poor People's Campaign, because I believe that we can win.
Thank you, Jordan. We are now available to take questions. Again, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat with your name and outlet, and we will try to get to as many of them as possible. Some of you have already sent over some questions, so we'll go ahead and get started. From Madison Muller with Sojourners, how does poor low-income voter turnout in 2020 compare to turnout in the past elections in 2012 and 2016? I'm going to repeat that question. From Madison Muller for Sojourners, how does poor and low-income voter turnout in 2020 compare to turnout in past elections in 2012 and 2016?
Thank you, Madison, for that question. I can give you a few numbers on registration and turnout from 2016 and 2020. Mindful to kind of use the same data set. Different data sets will give you different numbers. But in terms of registration, in 2016, low-income voters, 74% of the registration rate for low-income voters was 74% versus 80% in 2020. And for turnout, in 2016, the turnout rate for low-income voters was 58% versus 73% in 2020. Both of these numbers are also in a table in the report. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shally. And I also meant to offer that if you would like to ask your question live, feel free to use the raise hand feature, and we'll get to as many of those as we can as well. This next question is from Ayana Alexander with Bloomberg Law. It's two parts. Which states are you all targeting for registration and turnout ahead of the 2022 midterm elections? Also, based on that answer, how do you all plan to maneuver around states that have either implemented restrictive voting laws or plan to do so? For clarification, that's a two-part question of which states are being targeted and how the campaign will plan to maneuver around restrictive voting laws.
So this is Reverend Dr. Liz Theo-Harris. I can take a crack at those questions, and perhaps there are others as well, especially Penda Hare around the voting rights question. But in terms of the strategy of the Poor People's Campaign and National Call for Moral Revival, we are organized with coordinating committees in more than 45 states across the country. And in the 2020 election, we had folks reaching out in each and every one of those states, but then we focused our outreach on about 15 states. In this coming midterms, our plan is to keep on organizing, in all of those states, and then to continue to be able to target the states from that 2020 voter report and from our analysis moving forward of where particularly there can be an impact, a really important impact, like we saw in those numbers that Attorney Gupta Barnes just spoke about, of the change from 2016 to 2020, of low-income voters turning out. So our plan is to keep on organizing in every state. We believe that this sleeping giant of a third of the electorate, and in some states more than that, of poor and low-income voters, really has the potential not just to change the electoral outcomes in battleground states, but in all states. But we will still identify, and keep on working in the states that we've already been working in. And again, those are states across the South, across the West, across the Midwest, in particular, that where the margin of victory has been so small, and where the kind of turnout is potential. But we have a strategy that is about organizing from the ground up, and so we will be organizing all across the country. When it comes to this question of then, in the context of this, what are we going to do around this recent onslaught, and actually over lots of years onslaught of voter suppression laws, just like we did in the 2020 election, and now with things, even more states having voter suppression laws being enacted, we are both organizing and pushing to get federal legislation to ensure and expand voting rights, and we will continue to push that. This whole summer, we've organized a season of action linking the defense of this democracy and the protection and expansion of voting rights with these economic justice issues and living wages. And so we will continue that work, but we will also continue to do the work that we have done on a state level in the states that have, already enacted voter suppression laws, of a legal strategy as well as an organizing strategy of doing, massive mobilizing and organizing, registering and educating, doing important poll monitoring, and working kind of hand in hand with local leaders who are trying to really ensure that we are able to defend this democracy. I am imagining that I wanted to see if Attorney Penda Hare, who has helped us do so much of that work in the past, would also like to comment.
Oh, thank you, Reverend Theo Harris. Just a couple of things. One is there's a very organized litigation strategy. So all of these regressive laws are being challenged in court. And it shows us that all of us and all voters need to pay attention to the selection of judges and Supreme Court justices, and not just federal judges, but the state judges who are often elected. Those elections need to be as much in focus as the election for senator and representative. And then the second point is that I think it's already been mentioned that in 2020, the Poor People's Campaign did an on-the-ground voter protection program and monitoring the polls, and that needs to be expanded even more, and more places and with more intensity, because the obstacles are going to be greater and people are going to have to work harder. And then the third point, which Reverend Theo Harris made, is there is legislation pending at the federal level. And if it is enacted, the lawyers will be out enforcing that legislation and using it to try to stop these regressive barriers to voting.
If I can add one more point that connects to the first question, I mean, given the difference in voter turnout among low-income voters between 2016 and 2020, I mean, I think the measures for early voting, mail-in voting, drive-in voting that were implemented during the pandemic, you could see their impact on these millions of voters, and I think that provides a compelling argument in favor of instituting, and making permanent many of those mechanisms that ensured broader access to the polls for millions of people.
Thank you to Attorney Hare and Shali and Reverend Theo Harris. We also have a question from Bob Henley with Salon. Bob?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you.
Excellent. Thanks so much for having this important call. I see that your analysis looks at swing states in terms of the potential power of low wealth and poor voters, but considering that the balance of power in the House of Representatives hangs by the single digits, even in deep blue states like New Jersey, is it possible that we need to make sure that we don't underappreciate the power of the sleeping giant in those places? I'm thinking particularly of the swing district in southern New Jersey, which is poor, majority minority. The second congressional district, that's where Mr. Van Drew abandoned the Democratic Party to become a Republican, support President Trump. It's one of those 20 districts that voted for President Obama twice, and then in 2016 supported President Trump. It's a place that is one of the poorest counties, districts in the state of New Jersey. Shouldn't we be applying this matrix to those places as well?
Thank you for that question, Bob. Shali?
Yes, you're absolutely right. We looked at a few of these states in the body of the report, but in the appendix, we have information on just about every state in the country. And you're absolutely right in terms of looking at, the approach towards engaging and pulling in the sleeping giant, needs to be applied at a congressional district level, at a local level, at a state level, and the national level. At every level of elections, because those districts have determined, those smaller, electoral units have determined the outcomes of elections in 2020, in 2016, and in previous years. So very much agree with your statement and question, and that is why the Poor People's Campaign is organized across 45 states in the country, and will be in each of those states. The coordinating committees are charged with bringing in poor and low-income people from across the state. And so yes, it's very much the model of organizing and the theory of change that we think is necessary and possible.
Thank you, Shali.
I just want to add a little bit here. It's just kind of agreeing with what Shali Gupta Barnes was just saying, but It's also part of the lead up that the Poor People's Campaign is doing to the mass Poor People and Low Wage Workers Assembly and Moral March on Washington, which will be on June 18th of 2022. It's about being able to kind of come forward with large numbers of poor and low income people, low wage workers from all across the country, from every geography, in order to be able to kind of be showing and building this power of the poor and low income people of this nation. And from there, we will launch into a massive mobilizing, organizing, registering, and educating people for a movement that votes campaign into the midterms. And that will not just be in a couple of states, that will be in states all across the country where the Poor People's Campaign is organizing and is organized already. And again, this is pushing forward the fact that this an agenda that raises wages and expands healthcare and that ensures that people have education and childcare and clean water and clean air, and that takes corporate money out of politics and things that are vastly popular all across the country. An agenda that really does, as we say in this campaign, lift from the bottom so everybody can rise, is at the center of that midterms and all the organizing that we're doing.
Thank you, Reverend Theo Harris and Shally. We have a question from Charles Hallman with the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder. The question is, what is the biggest point to emphasize in the report and how the mainstream media will use the report? Is this reporting only up to Black press and Black media? Again, that's from Charles Hallman with the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder. Shally?
Yes, thank you, Charles, for this question. It is, I think, as others have said on the call, the responsibility of everybody in the media, in every outlet, to consider and take up these findings and what it means for a full third of the electorate to be poor and low income, to not be able to know where their how their needs are going to be met on a daily basis, especially as these deliberations are ongoing right now on Capitol Hill about the infrastructure needs, about additional stimulus programs and housing programs and protections for poor and low income people. As these debates are going on right now, it is incumbent on everybody to really consider what it means for a low-income electorate to be taking, these first steps towards expressing their needs and concerns, towards acting, taking action in the 2020 elections, towards organizing, as Reverend Liz has been talking about, towards this massive gathering and march and assembly in June 2022. And I would say the main findings are that to take away is both, the sheer size of this, of the voting electorate and the broader, eligible population of low-income voters, and the fact that, organizing multi-racial fusion coalitions of these voters can advance an agenda that will meet the needs of everybody in this country. Things like, as others have said, living wages and healthcare, which are enormously popular, including among, people who aren't poor and low income people. So those are, I'd say, were the main findings, that this is a massive segment of the electorate that will take action together. We know how to do that, around an agenda that speaks to their issues. And this is a charge for everybody to consider.
Thank you, Shally. I think we have time for one more question, if anyone wants to raise their hand. Okay. Assuming that all questions are answered, if there is any follow-up, feel free to reach out to me at lauren@kairoscenter.org. Bob, got you. Got one more hand. Bob Henley from Salon has another question.
Yeah, so one of the things in covering the debate of Build Back Better is it's reported by the corporate news media as being about personalities, if it's going to go up, go down, the particular senator's name's involved, and it's like an insider ball game. Wouldn't it be important to make this more meaningful for poor and low wealth folks to get granular? Shouldn't those of us in the media spend some time reporting what is actually in this Build Back Better that could transform the lives of these folks?
So I really appreciate this question, and I think it really does go hand in hand then with this report that we're releasing today. The Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, met actually with the economic policy team of the Biden administration shortly after the election, and in that meeting, we were able to put out much of the agenda that we had come forward and much of the conversation and organizing we had been doing with poor and low income people and voters all across the country. And many of those, not all and not enough, but many of those policies are what is in the Build Back Better plan and in other other legislative items that President Biden and Vice President Harris have been putting forward. And so indeed, I think more attention, and this past week, the Poor People's Campaign was in Washington, D.C. With poor and impacted women, especially essential workers from different states all across the country, trying to make this point that rather than a debate about how much the Build Back Better plan costs, what is the cost on the lives of people, especially those who are hit first and worst, who are in the forefront, who had to go back to work, got sick first, in this pandemic, and that who really helped to keep this country running. And we've been putting out, and will continue to, in the organizing work that we're doing, to insist that we have to put the impacts of and who is going to be impacted, right? If we cut the Build Back Better plan from 3.5 trillion over 10 years to 1.5 trillion over 10 years, that will eliminate 2 million jobs. If people were to be aware, the child tax credit is a wildly popular plan. Majority of people across political party, across many things, believe in it and support it, and want to make it permanent. And so, indeed, I think there is a need to both highlight what is in this plan and the people it's going to impact, because, again, I think that already there's a popularity, and that we have, a couple of senators standing in the way of the will of the majority of people, and what it's going to take to really be able to, help start lifting from the bottom. And so, in the work that the Poor People's Campaign will continue to do, and the work that we always do, we put a face, and we put the stories and solutions out there because they're there and they're at hand, and that we will keep on organizing to make sure that those in power, have heard these needs, these demands, and are clear about what is going to help lift from the bottom so everyone can rise.
Thank you, Reverend Liz. That wraps this conference on Waking the Sleeping Giant, low-income voters in 2020 elections. In the event you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is in the chat. And we thank you all for being here today. Have a good one.